The Memoirs of Victor Hugo by Victor Hugo. At the Tuileries. The King. June 28, 1844. Louis-Philippe. The king told me that Talleyrand said to him one day, "You will never be able to do anything with Thiers, although he would make an excellent tool. He is one of those men one cannot make use of, unless one is able to satisfy them. Now he never will be satisfied. It is unfortunate for him as for you that in our times he cannot be made a cardinal." Apropos of the fortifications of Paris, the king told me how the Emperor Napoleon learned the news of the taking of Paris by the Allies. The emperor was marching upon Paris at the head of his guard, near Juvisy, at a place in the forest of Fontainebleau where there is an obelisk that I never see without feeling heavy at heart, remarked the king. A courier on his way to meet Napoleon brought him the news of the capitulation of Paris. Paris had been taken. The enemy had entered it. The emperor turned pale. He hid his face in his hands and remained thus, motionless, for a quarter of an hour. Then, without saying a word, he turned about and took the road back to Fontainebleau. General Athelin witnessed this scene and recounted it to the king. July 1844. A few days ago the king said to Marshal Soult, in presence of others, "Marshal, do you remember the siege of Cadiz?" "Rather, sire, I should think so. I swore enough before that cursed Cadiz. I invested the place and was forced to go away as I had come." "Marshal, while you were before it, I was inside it." "I know, sire. The Cortes and the English cabinet offered me the command of the Spanish army." "I remember it. The offer was a grave one. I hesitated long. Bear arms against France. For my family it is possible, but against my country, I was greatly perplexed. At this juncture you asked me, through a trusty person, for a secret interview in a little house situated on the Cortadura between the city and your camp. Do you remember the fact, Monsieur the Marshal?" "Perfectly, sire. The day was fixed and the interview arranged. And I did not turn up." "That is so. Do you know why?" "I never knew." "I will tell you. As I was preparing to go to meet you, the commander of the English squadron, apprised of the matter, I know not how, dropped upon me brusquely and warned me that I was about to fall into a trap. That Cadiz being impregnable, they despaired of seizing me, but that at the Cortadura I should be arrested by you, that the emperor wished to make of the Duc d'Orléans a second volume of the Duc d'Enghien, and that you would have me shot immediately. There really," added the king, with a smile, "your hand on your conscience, were you going to shoot me?" The marshal remained silent for a moment, then replied, with a smile not less inexpressible than that of the king, "No, sire, I wanted to compromise you." The subject of conversation was changed. A few minutes later the marshal took leave of the king, and the king, as he watched him go, said with a smile to the person who heard this conversation, "Compromise. Compromise. Today it is called compromise. In reality he would have shot me." August 4, 1844. Yesterday the king said to me, "One of my embarrassments at present in all this affair of the university and the clergy is M. Affer. Archbishop Affer was shot and killed in the Faubourg Saint Antoine on September 25, 1848, while trying to stop the fighting between the troops and insurgents." "Then why, sire," said I, "did you appoint him?" "I made a mistake, I admit. I had at first appointed to the Archbishopric of Paris the Cardinal of Arras, M. de la Tour d'Auvergne. It was a good choice, I observed. Yes, good. He is insignificant. An honest old man of no account. Easy-going fellow. He was much sought after by the Carlists. Greatly imposed upon. His whole family hated me. He was induced to refuse. Not knowing what to do and being in haste, I named M. Affer. I ought to have been suspicious of him. His countenance is neither open nor frank. I took his underhand air for a priestly air. I did wrong. And then you. No, it was in 1840. Thiers proposed him to me and urged me to appoint him. Thiers is no judge of archbishops. I did it without sufficient reflection. I ought to have remembered what Talleyrand said to me one day: the Archbishop of Paris must always be an old man. The see is quieter and becomes vacant more frequently. I appointed M. Affer, who is young. It was a mistake. However, I will re-establish the chapter of Saint Denis and appoint as primate of it the Cardinal de la Tour d'Auvergne, the papal nuncio to whom I spoke of my project just now. laughed heartily at it and said, "The Abbé Affer will commit some folly. Should he go to Rome, the Pope will receive him very badly. He has acted pusillanimously and blunderingly on all occasions since he has been an archbishop. An archbishop of Paris who has any wit ought always to be on good terms with the king here and the Pope yonder." August 1844. A month or two ago the king went to Dreux. It was the anniversary of the death of the Duc d'Orléans. The king had chosen this day to put the coffins of his relatives in the family vault in order. Among the number was a coffin that contained all the bones of the princes of the House of Orleans that the Duchess d'Orléans, mother of the king, had been able to collect after the Revolution, when the sepulchre was violated and they were dispersed. The coffin, placed in a separate vault, had recently been smashed in by the fall of an arch. The debris of the arch, stones and plaster, had become mingled with the bones. The king had the coffin brought and opened before him. He was alone in the vault with the chaplain and 2 aides-de-camp. Another coffin, larger and stronger, had been prepared. The king himself, with his own hands, took, one after the other, the bones of his ancestors from the broken coffin and arranged them carefully in the new one. He would not permit anyone else to touch them. From time to time he counted the skulls and said, "This is Monsieur the Duc de Penthièvre. This is Monsieur the Count de Beaujolais." Then, to the best of his ability and as far as he was able to, he completed each group of bones. This ceremony lasted from 9 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock in the evening, without the king taking either rest or nourishment. August 1844. Yesterday, the 15th, after having dined at M. Villemain's, who lives in a country house near Neuilly, I called upon the king. The king was not in the salon, where there were only the queen, Madame Adelaide, and a few ladies, among them Madame Firmin Rogier, who is charming. There were many visitors, among others the Duc de Brogue and M. Rossi, who were of the dinner party at which I had been present, M. de Lesseps, who lately distinguished himself as consul at Barcelona, M. Firmin Rogier, and the Count d'Agout. I bowed to the queen, who spoke to me at length about the Princess de Joinville, who was delivered the day before yesterday and whose baby arrived on the very day the news of the bombardment of Tangier by its father was received. It is a little girl. The Princess de Joinville passes the whole day kissing her and saying, "How pretty she is," with that sweet southern accent which the raillery of her brothers-in-law has not yet caused her to lose. While I was talking to the queen, the Duchess d'Orléans, dressed in black, came in and sat beside Madame Adelaide, who said to her, "Good evening, dear Helene." A moment afterwards, M. Guizot, in black, wearing a chain of decorations with a red ribbon in his buttonhole and the badge of the Legion of Honor on his coat, and looking pale and grave, crossed the salon. I grasped his hand as he passed, and he said, "I have sought you vainly during the past few days. Come and spend a day with me in the country. We have a lot to talk about. I am at Auteuil, number 4, Place Diagonaux." "Will the king come tonight?" I asked. "I do not think so," he replied. "He is with Admiral de Mackau. There is serious news. He will be occupied all the evening." Then M. Guizot went away. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and I also was about to take my departure, when one of Madame Adelaide's ladies of honor, sent by the princess, came and told me that the king desired to speak with me and requested that I would remain. I returned to the salon, which had become almost empty. A moment later, as 10 o'clock was striking, the king came in. He wore no decorations and had a preoccupied air. As he passed by, he said to me, "Wait until I have gone my round. We shall have a little more time when everybody has left. There are only 4 persons here now, and I have only 4 words to say to them." In truth, he only tarried a moment with the Prussian ambassador and de Lesseps, who had to communicate to him a letter from Alexandria, relative to the strange abdication of the Pasha of Egypt. Everybody took leave, and then the king came to me, thrust his arm in mine, and led me into the large anteroom, where he seated himself and bade me be seated upon a red lounge which is between 2 doors opposite the fireplace. Then he began to talk rapidly, energetically, as though a weight were being lifted from his mind. "Monsieur Hugo, I am pleased to see you. What do you think of it all? All this is grave, yet it appears graver than it really is. But in politics, I know one has sometimes to take as much into account that which appears grave as that which is grave. We made a mistake in taking This confounded protectorate. Asterisk, we thought we were doing something popular for France, and we have done something embarrassing for the world. The popular effect was mediocre. The embarrassing effect is enormous. What did we want to hamper ourselves with? Tahiti, the king pronounced it teat, for? What to us was this pinch of tobacco seeds? In the middle of the ocean? What is the use of lodging our honor for? 1,000 leagues away in the box of a sentry, insulted by a savage and a madman? Upon the whole, there is something laughable about it. When all is said and done, it is a small matter and nothing big will come of it. Sir Robert Peel has spoken thoughtlessly. He has acted with schoolboy foolishness. He has diminished his consideration in Europe. He is a serious man, but capable of committing thoughtless acts. Then he does not know any languages. Unless he be a genius, there are perforce gaps in the ideas of a man who is not a linguist. Now Sir Robert has no genius. Would you believe it? He does not know French. Consequently, he does not understand anything about France. French ideas pass before him like shadows. He is not malevolent, no, he is not open, that is all. Yes, spoken without reflection. I judged him to be what he is 40 years ago. It was 40 years ago that I saw him for the first time. He was then a young man and secretary of the Earl of... I did not quite catch the name. The king spoke quickly. I often visited that house. Was then in England. When I saw young Peel, I felt sure that he would go a long way, but that he would stop. Was I mistaken? There are Englishmen, and of the highest rank, who do not understand Frenchmen, but like that poor Duke of Clarence, who afterwards was William IV, was but a sailor. One must beware of the sailor mind, as I often say to my son Joinville. He who is only a sailor is nothing on land. Well, this Duke of Clarence used to say to me, Duke d'Orleans, a war between France and England is necessary every 20 years. History shows it. I would reply, my dear Duke, of what use are people of intelligence if they allow mankind to do the same foolish things over and over again? The Duke of Clarence, like Peel, did not know a word of French. Asterisk, the Protectorate of Tahiti. What a difference between these men and Huskisson. You know Huskisson, who was killed on a railway. He was a masterly man, if you like. He knew French and liked France. He had been my comrade at the Jacobins' Club. Do not say this in bad part. He understood everything. If there were in England now a man like him, he and I would ensure the peace of the world. Monsieur Hugo, we will do it without him. I will do it alone. Sir Robert Peel will reconsider what he has said. Egad, he said that. Does he even know why or how? Have you seen the English Parliament? You speak from your place. Standing in the midst of your own party, you are carried away, you say more often than not what others think instead of what you think yourself. There is a magnetic communication. You are subjected to it. You rise. Here the king rose and imitated the gesture of an orator speaking in Parliament. The assembly ferments all round and close to you. You let yourself go. On this side somebody says, England has suffered a gross insult, and on that side, with gross indignity, is simply applause that is sought on both sides. Nothing more. But this is bad. It is dangerous. It is baleful. In France our tribune, which isolates the orator, has many advantages. Of all the English statesmen, I have known only one who was able to withstand this influence of assemblies. He was Pitt. Pitt was a clever man, although he was very tall. He had an air of awkwardness, and spoke hesitatingly. His lower jaw weighed 100 weight. That's a certain slowness which forcibly brought prudence into his speeches. Besides, what a statesman this Pitt was. They will render justice to him one of these days, even in France. Pitt and Coburg are still being harped upon, but it is a childish foolishness that will pass. Pitt knew French. To carry on politics properly, we must have Englishmen who know French and Frenchmen who know English. Look here, I am going to England next month. I shall be very well received. I speak English. And then Englishmen appreciate the fact that I have studied them closely enough not to detest them, for one always begins by detesting the English. This is an effect of the surface. Esteem them and pride myself upon the fact. Between ourselves, there is one thing I apprehend in going to England, and that is a too warm welcome. I shall have to elude an ovation. Popularity there would render me unpopular here. But I must not get myself badly received either. Badly received there, taunted here. It is not easy to move when one is Louis Philippe, is it, Monsieur Hugo? However, I will endeavor to manage it better than that big stupid. The Emperor of Russia, who went riding full gallop in search of a fall. There is an addlepate for you. What a simpleton. He is nothing but a Russian corporal, occupied with a boot heel and a gaiter button. What an idea to arrive in London on the eve of the Polish ball. Do you think I would go to England on the eve of the anniversary of Waterloo? What is the use of running deliberately into trouble? Nations do not derange their ideas for us princes. Monsieur Hugo. Monsieur Hugo. Intelligent princes are very rare. At this Pasha of Egypt, who had a bright mind and who abdicates like Charles V, who, although he was not without genius, committed the same foolish action. Look at this idiotic king of Morocco. What a job to govern amid this mob of bewildered kings. They won't force me into committing the great mistake of going to war. I am being pushed, but they won't push me over. Listen to this and remember it. The secret of maintaining peace is to look at everything from the good side and at nothing from the bad point of view. Sir Robert Peel is a singular man to speak so wildly. He does not know all our strength. He does not reflect. The Prince of Prussia made a very true remark to my daughter at Brussels last winter. What we envy France is Algeria, not on account of the territory but on account of the war. It is a great and rare good fortune for France to have at her doors a war that does not trouble Europe and which is making an army for her. We as yet have only review and parade soldiers. When a collision occurs we shall only have soldiers who have been made by peace. France, thanks to Algiers, will have soldiers made by war. This is what the Prince of Prussia said, and it was true. Meanwhile we are making children too. Last month it was my daughter of Nemours, this month it is my daughter of Joinville. She has given me a princess. I would have preferred a prince. But pish, in view of the fact that they are trying to isolate my house among the royal houses of Europe, future alliances must be thought of. Well, my grandchildren will marry among themselves. This little one who was born yesterday will not lack cousins nor, consequently, a husband. Here the king laughed and I rose. He had spoken almost without interruption for an hour and a quarter. I had only said a few words here and there. During this sort of long monologue Madame Adelaide passed as she retired to her apartments. The king said to her, "I will join you directly," and he continued his conversation with me. It was nearly 11:30 when I quitted the king. It was during this conversation that the king said to me, "Have you ever been to England?" "No, sire." "Well, when you do go, for you will see how strange it is. It resembles France in nothing. Over there are order, arrangement, symmetry, cleanliness, well-mown lawns, and profound silence in the streets. The passers-by are as serious and mute as specters. When being French and alive, you speak in the street, these specters look back at you and murmur with an inexpressible mixture of gravity and disdain. French people. When I was in London I was walking arm in arm with my wife and sister. We were conversing, not in a too loud tone of voice, for we are well-bred persons, you know, yet all the passers-by, bourgeois and men of the people, turned to gaze at us and we could hear them growling behind us. French people. French people. September 5, 1844. The king rose, paced to and fro for a few moments as though violently agitated, then came and sat beside me and said, "Look here, you made a remark to Villemain that he repeated to me." I said to him, "The trouble between France and England a propos of Tahiti and Pritchard reminds me of a quarrel in a café between a couple of sub-lieutenants, one of whom has looked at the other in a way the latter does not like. A duel to the death is the result. But two great nations ought not to act like a couple of musketeers. Besides, in a duel to the death between two nations like England and France, it is civilization that would be slain." This is really what you said, is it not? Yes, sire. I was greatly struck by your observation, and this very evening I reproduced it in a letter to a crowned head, for I frequently write all night long. I pass many a night doing over again what others have undone. I do not say anything about it. So far from being grateful to me, they would only abuse me for it. Yes, mine is hard work indeed. At my age, with my 71 years, I do not get an instant of real repose either by day or by night. I am always unquiet, and how can it be? Otherwise when I feel that I am the pivot upon which Europe revolves. September 6, 1844. The king said to me yesterday, "What makes the maintenance of peace so difficult is that there are two things in Europe that Europe detests, France and myself even. More than France. I am talking to you in all frankness. They hate me. Because I am Orleans, they hate me because I am myself. As for France, they dislike her but would tolerate her in other hands. Napoleon was a burden to them. They overthrew him by egging him on to war of which he was so fond. I am a burden to them, they would like to throw me down by forcing me to break that peace which I love." Then he covered his eyes with his hands, and leaning his head back upon the cushions of the sofa, remained thus for a space pensive and as though crushed. September 6, 1844. "I only met Robespierre in society once," said the king to me. "It was at a place called Migno near Poissy, which still exists. It belonged to a wealthy cloth manufacturer of Louviers, named M. Decreteau. Was in 91 or 2. Decreteau one day invited me to dinner at Migno. I went. When the time came we took our places at table. The other guests were Robespierre and Pétion, but I had never before seen Robespierre. Mirabeau aptly traced his portrait in a word when he said that his face was suggestive of that of a cat drinking vinegar. He was very gloomy and hardly spoke. When he did let drop a word from time to time it was uttered sourly and with reluctance. He seemed to be vexed at having come and because I was there. In the middle of the dinner, Pétion, addressing M. Decreteau, exclaimed, 'My dear host, you must get this buck married.' He pointed to Robespierre. 'What do you mean, Pétion?' retorted Robespierre. 'Mean,' said Pétion, 'why that you must get married. I insist upon marrying you. You are full of sourness, hypochondria, gall, bad humor, biliousness and atrabiliousness. I am fearful of all this on our account. What you want is a woman to sweeten this sourness and transform you into an easy-going old fogey.' Robespierre tossed his head and tried to smile, but only succeeded in making a grimace. 'It was the only time,' repeated the king, 'that I met Robespierre in society. After that I saw him in the tribune of the Convention. He was wearisome to a supreme degree, spoke slowly, heavily, and at length, and was more sour, more gloomy, more bitter than ever. Was easy to see that Pétion had not married him. September 7, 1844. Said the king to me last Thursday, 'M. Guizot has great qualities and immense defects.' Queerly enough, Guizot on Tuesday had made precisely the same remark to me about the king, beginning with the defects. Guizot has in the highest degree, and I esteem him for it profoundly, the courage of his unpopularity. Among his adversaries, among his friends he lacks it. He does not know how to quarrel momentarily with his partisans, which was Pitt's great art. In the affair of Tahiti, as in that of the right of search, M. Guizot is not afraid of the opposition, nor of the press, nor of the radicals, nor of the Carlists, nor of the legitimists, nor of the 100,000 howlers in the 100,000 public squares of France. He is afraid of Jacques Lefebvre. What will Jacques Lefebvre say? And Jacques Lefebvre is afraid of the 12th arrondissement. What will the 12th arrondissement say? The 12th arrondissement does not. Like the English, we must stand firm against the English, but it does not like war. We must give way to the English. Stand firm and give way. Reconcile that. The 12th arrondissement governs Jacques Lefebvre. Jacques Lefebvre governs Guizot. A little more in the 12th arrondissement will govern France. I say to Guizot, what are you afraid? Have a little pluck. Have an opinion. But there they all stand, pale and motionless, and make no reply. Fear. Monsieur Hugo, it is a strange thing, this fear of the hubbub that will be raised outside. It seizes upon this one, then that one, then that one, and it goes the round of the table. I am not a minister, but if I were, it seems to me that I should not be afraid. I should see the right and go straight towards it. And what greater aim could there be than civilization? Through peace. 12th District of Paris. The Duc d'Orléans a few years ago recounted to me that during the period which followed immediately upon the Revolution of July, the king gave him a seat at his council table. The young prince took part in the deliberations of the ministers. One day M. Marilou, who was minister of justice, fell asleep while the king was speaking. "Chartres," said the king to his son, "wake up Monsieur the keeper of The seals. The Duke d'Orléans obeyed. He was seated next to M. Marillo and nudged him gently with his elbow. The minister was sleeping soundly. The prince recommenced, but the minister slept on. Finally the prince laid his hand upon M. Marillo's knee. The minister awoke with a start and exclaimed, "Leave off, Sophie, you are tickling me." This is how the word subject came to be eliminated from the preamble of laws and ordinances. Dupont de Allure in 1830 was Minister of Justice. On August 7, the very day the Duc d'Orléans took the oath as King, M. Dupont de Allure laid before him a law to sign. The preamble read, "Be it known and decreed to all our subjects," etc. The clerk, who was instructed to copy the law, a hot-headed young fellow, objected to the word subjects, and did not copy it. The Minister of Justice arrived. The young man was employed in his office. "Well," said the minister, "is the copy ready to be taken to the king for signature?" "No, monsieur the minister," replied the clerk. Explanations. Dupont de Allure listened, then pinching the young man's ear said, half smilingly, half angrily, "Nonsense, monsieur the Republican, you just copy it at once." The clerk hung his head like a clerk that he was and copied it. Dupont, however, laughingly told the king about it. The king did not laugh. Everything appeared to be a serious matter at that time. Dupin, senior minister without a portfolio, had entered the council chamber. He avoided the use of the word and got round the obstacle. He proposed this wording, which was agreed to and has always been used since, "Be it known and decreed to all." 1847. The state carriage of Louis Philippe was a big blue coach drawn by 8 horses. The interior was of gold-colored damask. On the doors was the king's monogram surmounted by a crown, and on the panels were royal crowns. The roof was bordered by 8 little silver crowns. There was a gigantic coachman on the box and 3 lackeys behind. All wore silk stockings and the tricolor livery of the d'Orléans. The king would enter the carriage first and seat himself in the right-hand corner. Then the Duc de Nemours would take his place beside the king. The 3 other princes would follow and seat themselves, M. de Joinville opposite the king, M. de Montpensier opposite M. de Nemours, and M. d'Aumale in the middle. The day the king attended Parliament, the grand deputations from both houses, 12 peers and 25 deputies chosen by lot, awaited him on the grand staircase of the Palais Bourbon. As the sessions were nearly always held in winter, it was very cold on the stairs. A biting wind made all these old men shiver, and there are old generals of the empire who did not die as the result of having been at Austerlitz, at Friedland, at the cemetery at Eylau, at the storming of the Grand Redoubt at Moscow, and under the fire of the Scottish squares at Waterloo, but of having waited in the cold upon these stairs. The peers stood to the right and the deputies to the left, leaving the middle of the stairs clear. The staircase was partitioned off with hangings of white drill with blue stripes, which was a poor protection against draughts. Where are the good and magnificent tapestries of Louis XIV? They were indeed royal, wherefore they were taken down. Drill is a common material and more pleasing to the deputies. It charms and it freezes them. The queen arrived first with the princesses, but without the Duchess d'Orléans, who came separately with the Count de Paris. These ladies walked quickly upstairs, bowing to right and left without speaking, but graciously, followed by a swarm of aides-de-camp in grim turbaned old women whom M. de Joinville called the Queen's Turks, Madames de Doloquieu, de Chanalay, etc. At the royal session of 1847, the Queen gave her arm to the Duchess de Montpensier. The princess was muffled up on account of the cold. Could see only a big red nose. The 3 other princesses walked behind, chatting and laughing. Anatole de Montesquieu came next in the much-worn uniform of a major general. The king arrived about 5 minutes after the queen. He walked upstairs even more quickly than she had done, followed by the princes running like schoolboys, and bowed to the peers on the right and the deputies on the left. He tarried a moment in the throne room and exchanged a few greetings with the members of the 2 deputations. Then he entered the large hall. The speech from the throne was written on parchment on both sides of the sheet and usually filled 4 pages. The king read it in a firm, well-modulated voice. Marshal Soult was present, resplendent with decorations, sashes, and gold lace and complaining of his rheumatism. Pasquier, the chancellor, did not put in an appearance. He had excused himself on the plea of the cold and of his 80 years. He had been present the year before. It was the last time. In 1847 I was a member of the Grand Deputation. While I strolled about the waiting room, conversing with M. Villemain about Krakow, the Vienna treaties and the frontier of the Rhine, I could hear the buzzing of the groups around me, and scraps of conversation reached my ears. Comte de Lagrange, ah! Here comes the Marshal, Soult. Baron Pedro Lacaze. He is getting old. Viscount Cavaignac, 69 years. Marquis de Ragecourt, who is the Dean of the Chamber of Peers at present? Duc de Trévise, M. De Pontecoulant, is he not? Marquis de la Plaza. No, President Bouyer. He is 92. President Barth. He is older than that. Baron d'Oberlin. He no longer comes to the chamber. Viennet. They say that M. Rossi is returning from Rome. Duc de Fesenzac. Well, I pity him for quitting Rome. It is the finest and most amiable city in the world. I hope to end my days there. Count de Montalembert. And Naples. Baron Thenard. I prefer Naples. Fulcherin. Yes, Naples, that's the place. By the by, I was there when poor Nuret killed himself. I was staying in the house next to Baron Charles de Pan. He took his life? It was not an accident? Fulcherin. Oh, it was a case of suicide, sure enough. He had been hissed the previous day. He could not stand that. It was in an opera composed expressly for him, Polly Sooked. He threw himself from a height of 60 feet. His voice did not please that particular public. Nuret was too much accustomed to sing Gluck and Mozart. The Neapolitans said of him, Vecchico canto. Baron de Pan, poor Nuret, why did he not wait? Duprez has lost his voice. 11 years ago Duprez demolished Nuret. Today Nuret would demolish Duprez. Marquis de Boissy, how cold it is on this staircase. Count Philippe de Segur. It was even colder at the Academy the other day. That poor Dupaty is a good man, but he made a bad speech. Baron Futrier, I am trying to warm myself. What a frightful draught. It is enough to drive one away. Baron Charles de Pan, M. Français de Nantes at Conserve 10 expédies. To rid himself of those who came to solicit favors and abridge their solicitations, he was given to receiving people between two doors. Thiers at this time had a veritable court of deputies about him. After the session he walked out in front of me. A gigantic deputy whose back only I could see stepped aside, saying, "Make way for historical men." And the big man let the little man pass. Historical? Maybe. In what way? The Duchess d'Orléans. Madame the Duchess d'Orléans is a rare woman, of great wit and common sense. I do not think that she is fully appreciated at the Tuileries. The king, though, holds her in high esteem and often engages in long conversations with her. Frequently he gives her his arm to escort her from the family drawing room to her apartments. The royal daughters-in-law do not always appear to act as kindly towards her. February 26, 1844. Yesterday the Duchess d'Orléans said to me, "My son is not what one would call an amiable child. He is not one of those pretty little prodigies who are an honor to their mothers and of whom people say, 'What a clever child! What wit! What grace!' He has a kind heart, I know, he has wit, I believe, but nobody knows and believes. This saved myself. He is timid, wild, uncommunicative, easily scared. What will he become? I have no idea. Often at his age a child in his position understands that he must make himself agreeable, and little as he is, sets himself to play his role. Mine hides himself in his mother's skirt and lowers his eyes. But I love him just as he is. I even prefer him this way. I like a savage better than a comedian." August 1844. The Count de Paris has signed the birth certificate of the princess. Françoise de Joinville. It was the first time that the little prince had signed his name. He did not know what was wanted of him, and when the king handed him the certificate and said, "Paris, sign your name," the child refused. The Duchess d'Orléans took him on her knee and whispered something to him. Then the child took the pen and at the dictation of his grandfather wrote upon the certificate L.D.O. He made the O much too large and wrote the other letters awkwardly and was very much embarrassed and shy. He is charming though and adores his mother, but he hardly knows that. His name is Louis Philippe d'Orleans. He writes to his comrades, to his tutor and to his mother, but he signs his little missives Paris. Is the only name he knows himself by. This evening the king sent for M. Regnier, the prince's tutor, and gave him orders to teach the Count de Paris to sign his name. 1847. The Count de Paris is of a grave and sweet disposition. He learns well. He is imbued with a natural tenderness and is kind to those who suffer. His young cousin of Württemberg, who is 2 months older, is jealous of him, as his mother, the Princess Marie, was jealous of the mother of the Count de Paris. During the lifetime of the Duc d'Orleans, little Württemberg was long the object of the Queen's preferences, and in the little court of the corridors and bedchambers, it was the custom to flatter the Queen by comparisons between the one and the other that were always favorable to Württemberg. Today that inequality has ceased. The Queen, by a touching sentiment, inclined towards little Württemberg. Because he had lost his mother, now there is no reason why she should not lean towards the Count de Paris, seeing that he has lost his father. Little Michel Ney plays with the two princes every Sunday. He is 11 years old and the son of the Duc d'Elchingen. The other day he said to his mother, "Württemberg is an ambitious fellow. When we play he always wants to be the leader. Besides, he insists upon being called Monseigneur. I don't mind calling him Monseigneur, but I won't let him be leader. One day I invented a game and I said to him, 'No, Monseigneur, you are not going to be the leader. I will be leader, for I invented the game, and Chabannes will be my lieutenant. You and the Count de Paris will be soldiers.' Paris was willing, but Württemberg walked away. He is an ambitious fellow." Of these young mothers of the chateau, apart from the Duchess d'Orleans, Madame de Joinville is the only one who does not spoil her children. At the Tuileries, everybody, even the king himself, calls her little daughter Chiquette. The Prince of Joinville calls his wife Chiquard. Since the Pierrot's ball, hence Chiquette. At this Pierrot's ball, the king exclaimed, "How Chiquard is amusing herself." The Prince de Joinville danced all the risky dances. Madame de Montpensier and Madame Léodiers were the only ones who were not décolletés. "It is not in good taste," said the Queen. "But it is pretty," observed the king. The Princes. 1847. At the Tuileries the Prince de Joinville passes his time doing all sorts of wild things. One day he turned on all the taps and flooded the apartments. Another day he cut all the bell ropes. A sign that he is bored and does not know what to do with himself. And what bores these poor princes most is to receive and talk to people ceremoniously. This is almost a daily obligation. They call it for. Princes have their slang, performing the function. The Duc de Montpensier is the only one who performs it gracefully. One day the Duchess d'Orleans asked him the reason. He replied, "It amuses me." He is 20 years old, he is beginning. When the marriage of M. de Montpensier with the Infanta was published, the King of the Belgians was sulky with the Tuileries. He is an Orleans. But he is a Coburg. It was as though his left hand had smitten his right. The wedding over, while the young couple were making their way from Madrid to Paris, King Leopold arrived at St. Cloud, where King Louis Philippe was staying. The King of the Belgians wore an air of coldness and severity. Louis Philippe, after dinner, took him aside into a recess of the Queen's drawing room, and they conversed for fully an hour. Leopold's face preserved its thoughtful and English expression. However, at the conclusion of the conversation, Louis Philippe said to him, "See Guizot. He is precisely the man I do not want to see." "See him," urged the king. "We will resume this conversation when you have done so." The next day M. Guizot waited upon King Leopold. He had with him an enormous portfolio filled with papers. The king received him. His manner was cold in the extreme. Both were reserved. It is probable that M. Guizot communicated to the King of the Belgians all the documents relative to the marriage and all the diplomatic papers. No one knows what passed between them. What is certain is that when M. Guizot left the king's room, Leopold's air was gracious though sad, and that he was heard to say to the minister as he took leave of him, "I came here greatly dissatisfied with you. I shall go away satisfied. You have, in fact, in this affair acquired a new title to my esteem and to our gratitude. I intended to scold you, I thank you. These were the king's own words. The Prince de Joinville's deafness increases. Sometimes it saddens him. Sometimes he makes light of it. One day he said to me, "Speak louder, I am as deaf as a post." On another occasion he bent towards me and said, with a laugh, "J'abaisse le pavillon de l'oreille point." "It is the only one your highness will ever lower," I replied. De Joinville is of somewhat queer disposition. Now he is joyous to the point of folly, anon gloomy as a hypochondriac. He is silent for 3 days at a time, or his bursts of laughter are heard in the very attics of the Tuileries. When he is on a voyage he rises at 4 o'clock. In the morning wakes everybody up and performs his duties as a sailor conscientiously. It is as though he were to win his epaulettes. Afterwards, he loves France and feels all that touches her. This explains his fits of moodiness. Since he cannot talk as he wants to, he keeps his thoughts to himself, and this sours him. He has spoken more than once, however, and bravely. He was not listened to and he was not heeded. "They needn't talk about me," he said to me one day, "it is they who are deaf." Unlike the late Duc d'Orléans, he has no princely coquettishness, which is such a victorious grace, and has no desire to appear agreeable. He rarely seeks to please individuals. He loves the nation, the country, his profession, the sea. His manner is frank. He has a taste for noisy pleasures, a fine appearance, a handsome face with a kind heart, and a few feats of arms to his credit that have been exaggerated. He is popular. De Nemours is just the contrary. At court they say, there is something unlucky about the Duc de Nemours. De Montpensier has the good sense to love, to esteem and to honor profoundly the Duchess d'Orléans. The other day there was a masked and costumed ball, but only for the family and the intimate court circle, the princesses and ladies of honor. De Joinville appeared all in rags and complete chequard costume. He was extravagantly gay and danced 1,000 unheard of dances. These capers, prohibited elsewhere, rendered the queen thoughtful. "Wherever did he learn all this?" she asked, and added, "What naughty dances! Fie!" Then she murmured, "How graceful he is!" Madame de Joinville was dressed as a bargee and affected the manner of a street gamin. She likes to go to those places that the court detests the most, the theaters and concerts of the boulevards. The other day she greatly shocked Madame de Hall, the wife of an admiral, who is a Protestant and Puritan, by asking her, "Madame, have you seen the Classerie de Genets?" The Prince de Joinville had imagined a nuisance that exasperated the queen. He procured an old barrel organ somewhere and would enter her apartments playing it and singing in a hoarse, grating voice. The queen laughed at first, but it lasted a quarter of an hour, half an hour. "Joinville, stop it." He continued to grind away. "Joinville, go away." The prince, driven out of one door, entered by another with his organ, his songs and his hoarseness. Finally the queen fled to the king's apartments. The Duchess d'Aumale did not speak French very fluently, but as soon as she began to speak Italian, the Italian of Naples, she thrilled like a fish that falls back into the water, and gesticulated with Neapolitan verve. "Put your hands in your pockets," the Duc d'Aumale would say to her. "I shall have to have your hands tied. Why do you gesticulate like that?" "I didn't notice it," the princess would reply. "That is true, she doesn't notice it," said the prince to me one day. "You wouldn't believe it, but my mother, who is so dignified, so cold, so reserved when she is speaking French, begins gesticulating like Punchinello when by chance she speaks Neapolitan." The Duc de Montpensier salutes passers-by graciously and gaily. The Duc d'Aumale does not salute more often than he is compelled to. At Neuilly they say he is afraid of ruffling his hair. The Duc de Nemours manifests less eagerness than the Duc de Montpensier and less negligence than the Duc d'Aumale. Moreover, women say that when saluting them he looks at them in a most embarrassing way. Donizetti's Elixir of Love was performed at court on February 5, 1847, by the Italian singers the Persiani Mario Tagliafico. Ronconi acted. Acted is the word, for he acted very well, the role of Dulcamera, usually represented by Lablache. It was in the matter of size, but not of talent, a giant in the place of a dwarf. The decoration of the theater at the Tuileries was then still the same as it had been in the time of the Empire, designs in gold on a gray background, the ensemble being cold and pale. There were few pretty women present. Madame Cuvelier Flowery was the prettiest, Madame V.H. the most handsome. The men were in uniform or full evening dress. 2 officers of the empire were conspicuous in their uniforms of that period. Count d'Utileries, a one-armed soldier of the empire, wore the old uniform of a general of division, embroidered with oak leaves to the facings. The big straight collar reached to his occiput. His star of the Legion of Honor was all dented. His embroidery was rusty and dull. Count de Lagrange, an old beau, wore a white spangled waistcoat, black silk breeches, white or rather pink stockings, shoes with buckles on them, a sword at his side, a black dress coat, and a peer's hat with white plumes in it. Count d'Utileries was a greater success than Count de Lagrange. The one recalled Monaco and Trenitz, the other recalled Wagram. Thiers, who the previous day had made a somewhat poor speech, carried opposition to the point of wearing a black cravat. The Duchess de Montpensier, who had attained her 15th birthday 8 days before, wore a large crown of diamonds and looked very pretty. M. de Jouffil was absent. The 3 other princes were there, in lieutenant general's uniform with the star and grand cordon of the Legion of Honor. A de Montpensier alone wore the Order of the Golden Fleece. Madame Ronconi, a handsome person, but of a wild and savage beauty, was in a small box on the stage in rear of the proscenium. She attracted much attention. There was no applause, which chilled the singers and everybody else. 5 minutes before the piece terminated, the king began to pack up. He folded his program and put it in his pocket. Then he wiped the glasses of his opera glass, closed it up carefully, looked round for the case, which he had laid on his chair, placed the glass in it and adjusted the hooks very scrupulously. There was a good deal of character in his methodical manner. De Rambuteau was there. His latest Rambutisms, the word was Alexis, de Saint-Priests, were recounted among the audience. It was said that, on the last day of the year, M. de Rambuteau wrote on his card, M. de Rambuteau est venu hors à variation, M. de Rambuteau, venu en personne. Wednesday, February 24th, the Duc de Nemours gave a concert at the Tuileries. The singers were Émilie Grisi, Madame Pergiani, a Madame Corbari, Mario Lablache and Ronconi. Aubert, who conducted, did not put any of his own music on the program. Rossini, Mozart, and Donizetti, that was all. The guests arrived at 8:30. The Duc de Nemours lives on the first floor of the Pavillon de Marsan, over the apartments of the Duchesse d'Orléans. The guests waited in a first salon until the doors of the grand salon were opened, the women seated, the men standing. As soon as the prince and princess appeared, the doors were thrown wide open and everybody went in. This grand salon is a very fine room. The ceiling is evidently of the time of Louis XIV. The wails are hung with green damask, striped with gold. The inner window curtains are of red damask. The furniture is in green and gold damask. The ensemble is royal. The king and queen of the Belgians were at this concert. The Duc de Nemours entered with the queen, his sister, upon his arm, the king giving his arm to the Duchess de Nemours. Madames d'Aumale and de Montpensier followed. The queen of the Belgians resembles the queen of the French, save in the matter of age. She wore a sky-blue toque, Madame d'Aumale a wreath of roses, Madame de Montpensier a diadem of diamonds, Madame de Nemours her golden hair. The 4 princesses sat in high-backed chairs opposite the piano. All the other women sat behind them. The men were in the rear, filling the doorway and the first salon. The king of the Belgians has a rather handsome and grave face and a delicate and agreeable smile. He was seated to the left of the princesses. The Duc de Brogue sat on his left. Next to the Duke were Count Mole and de Pan Senior. De Salvandy, seeing an empty chair to the right of the king, seated himself upon it. All 5 wore the red sash, including de Pan. These 4 men about the king of the Belgians represented the old military nobility, the parliamentary aristocracy, the pettifogging bourgeoisie and moonshine literature, that is to say, a little of what France possesses that is illustrious and a little of what she possesses that is ridiculous. D'Aumale and de Montpensier were to the right in the recess of a window with the Duke of Württemberg, whom they called their brother Alexander. All the princes wore the grand cordon and star of Leopold, in honor of the king of the Belgians. M. de Nemours and de Montpensier also wore the golden fleece. The fleece of M. de Montpensier was of diamonds and magnificent. The Italian singers sang standing by the piano. When seated they occupied chairs with wooden backs. The Prince de Joinville was absent, as was also his wife. Was said that lately he was the hero of a love affair. M. de Joinville, prodigiously strong. I heard a big lackey behind me say, I shouldn't care to receive a slap from him. While he was strolling to his rendezvous, M. de Joinville thought he noticed that he was being followed. He turned back, went up to the fellow and struck him. After the first part of the concert, M. Nomel and de Montpensier came into the other salon where I had taken refuge with Théophile Gautier, and we chatted for fully an hour. The two princes spoke to me at length about literary matters, about Les Burgraves, Ruy Blas, Lucrece Borgia, Madame Halley, Émilie Georges and Frédéric Lemaitre. Also a good deal about Spain, the royal wedding, bullfights, hand-kissings, and etiquette that M. de Montpensier detests. The Spaniards love royalty, he added, and especially etiquette. In politics as in religion they are bigots rather than believers. They were greatly shocked during the wedding fetes because the Queen one day dared to venture out afoot. M. Dumel and de Montpensier are charming young men, bright, gay, gracious, witty, sincere, full of that ease that communicates itself to others. They have a fine air. They are princes, they are perhaps men of intellect. De Nemours is embarrassed and embarrassing. When he comes towards you with his blonde whiskers, his blue eyes, his red sash, his white waistcoat and his melancholy air, he perturbs you. He never looks you in the face. He always casts about for something to say and never knows what he does say. November 5, 1847. 4 years ago the Duc d'Aumale was in barracks at Courbevoie with the 17th, of which he was then colonel. During the summer, in the morning, after the maneuvers which took place at Neuilly, he frequently strolled back along the river bank, alone, his hands behind his back. Nearly every day he happened upon a pretty girl named Adèle Protat, who every morning went from Courbevoie to Neuilly and returned at the same hour as M. d'Aumale. The young girl noticed the young officer in undress uniform but was not aware that he was a prince. At length they struck up an acquaintance and walked and chatted together. Under the influence of the sun, the flowers, and the fine morning, something very much like love sprang up between them. Adèle Protat thought she had to do with a captain at the most. He said to her, "Come and see me at Courbevoie." She refused feebly. One evening she was passing near Neuilly in a boat. 2 young men were bathing. She recognized her officer. "There is the Duc d'Aumale," said the boatman. "Really?" said she and turned pale. The next day she had ceased to love him. She had seen him naked and knew that he was a prince. In the Chamber of Peers. 1846. Yesterday, February 22nd, I went to the Chamber of Peers. The weather was fine and very cold in spite of the noonday sun. In the Rue de Tournon I met a man in the custody of 2 soldiers. The man was fair, pale, thin, haggard, about 30 years old. He wore coarse linen trousers. His bare and lacerated feet were visible in his sabots and blood-stained. Bandages round his ankles took the place of stockings. His short blouse was soiled with mud in the back, which indicated that he habitually slept on the ground. His head was bare, his hair disheveled. Under his arm was a loaf. The people who surrounded him said that he had stolen the loaf, and it was for this that he had been arrested. When they reached the gendarmerie barracks, one of the soldiers entered, and the man stayed at the door guarded by the other soldier. A carriage was standing at the door of the barracks. It was decorated with a coat of arms. On the lanterns was a ducal coronet. 2 gray horses were harnessed to it. Behind it were 2 lackeys. The windows were raised, but the interior, upholstered in yellow damask, was visible. The gaze of the man fixed upon this carriage attracted mine. In the carriage was a woman in a pink bonnet and costume of black velvet, fresh, white, beautiful, dazzling, who was laughing and playing with a charming child of 16 months, buried in ribbons, lace, and furs. This woman did not see the terrible man who was gazing at her. I became pensive. This man was no longer a man for me. He was the specter of misery, the brusque, deformed, lugubrious apparition in full daylight, in full sunlight, of a revolution that is still plunged in darkness, but which is approaching. In former times the poor jostled the rich. This specter encountered the rich man in all his glory, but they did not look at each other, they passed on. This condition of things could thus last for some time. The moment this man perceives that this woman exists, while this woman does not see that this man is there, the catastrophe is inevitable. General Favier. Favier had fought valiantly in the wars of the empire. He fell out with the Restoration over the obscure affair of Grenoble. He expatriated himself about 1816. It was the period of the departure of the Eagles. Lallemand went to America, Allard and Van Nova to India, Favier to Greece. The Revolution of 1820 broke out. He took an heroic part in it. He raised a corps of 4,000 Palikers, to whom he was not a chief, but a god. He gave them civilization and taught them barbarity. He was rough and brave above all of them and almost ferocious, but with that grand Homeric ferocity. One might have thought that he had come from a tent of the camp of Achilles rather than from the camp of Napoleon. He invited the English ambassador to dinner at his bivouac. The ambassador found him seated by a big fire at which a whole sheep was roasting. When the animal was cooked and unskewered, Favier placed the heel of his bare foot upon the neck of the smoking and bleeding sheep and tore off a quarter, which he offered to the ambassador. In bad times nothing daunted him. He was indifferent alike to cold, heat, fatigue and hunger. He never spared himself. The Palikers used to say, when the soldier eats cooked grass, Favier eats it green. I knew his history, but I had not seen him when, in 1846, General Favier was made a peer of France. One day he had a speech to make and the Chancellor announced, Baron Favier has the tribune. I expected to hear a lion. I thought an old woman was speaking. Yet his face was a truly masculine one, heroic and formidable, that one might have fancied had been molded by the hand of a giant and which seemed to have preserved a savage and terrible grimace. What was so strange was the gentle, slow, grave, contained, caressing voice that was allied to this magnificent ferocity. A child's voice issued from this tiger's mouth. General Favier delivered from the tribune speeches learned by heart. Graceful, flowery, full of allusions to the woods and country, veritable idols. In the tribune this Ajax became a Nemorin. He spoke in low tones like a diplomat, he smiled like a courtier. He was not averse to making himself agreeable to princes. This is what the peerage had done for him. He was only a hero after all. August 22, 1846. The Marquis de Boissy has assurance, coolness, self-possession, a voice that is peculiar to himself, facility of speech, wit, occasionally the quality of imperturbability, all the accessories of a great orator. The only thing he lacks is talent. He wearies the chamber, wherefore the ministers do not consider themselves bound to answer him. He talks as long as everybody keeps quiet. He fences with the Chancellor as with his particular enemy. Yesterday, after the session which Boissy had entirely occupied with a very poor speech, Guizot said to me, "It is an affliction. The Chamber of Deputies would not stand him for 10 minutes after the first 2 times. The Chamber of Peers extends its high politeness to him and it does wrong. Boissy will not be suppressed until the day the whole chamber rises and walks out when he asks permission to speak." "You cannot think of such a thing," said I. "Only he and the Chancellor would be left. It would be a duel without seconds." It is the custom of the Chamber of Peers never to repeat in its reply to the speech from the throne the titles that the king gives to his children. It is also the custom never to give the princes the title of Royal Highness when speaking of them to the king. There is no highness in presence of His Majesty. Today, January 18th, the address in reply to the speech from the throne was debated. Occasionally there are flashes of keen and happy wit in M. de Boissier's nonsense. He remarked today, "I am not of those who are grateful to the government for the blessings of Providence." As usual he quarreled with the Chancellor. He was making some more than usually roving excursion from the straight path. The chamber murmured and cried, "Confine yourself to the question." The Chancellor rose. "Monsieur the Marquis de Boissy," he said, "the chamber requests that you will confine yourself to the question under discussion." Has saved me the trouble of asking you to do so. Our colleague might as well have said spared me. I whispered to Lebrun. "I am delighted on your account, Monsieur the Chancellor," replied M. de Boissy, and the chamber laughed. A few minutes later, however, the Chancellor took his revenge. And Boise had floundered into some quibble about the rules. It was late. The chamber was becoming impatient. Had you not raised an unnecessary incident, observed the chancellor, you would have finished your speech a long time ago to your own satisfaction and that of everybody else. Whereat everybody laughed. Don't laugh, exclaimed the Duc de Mortemart. Laughter diminishes the prestige of a constituted body. De Pontecoulant said, M. De Boise teases Monsieur the Chancellor. Monsieur the Chancellor torments M. De Boise. There is a lack of dignity on both sides. During the session the Duc de Mortemart came to my bench and we spoke about the Emperor. De Mortemart went through all the great wars. He speaks nobly of him. He was one of the Emperor's orderlies in the campaign of 1812. It was during that campaign that I learned to know the Emperor. He said, I was near him night and day. I saw him shave himself in the morning, sponge his chin, pull on his boots, pinch his valet's ear, chat with the grenadier mounting guard over his tent, laugh, gossip, make trivial remarks, and amid all this issue orders, trace plans, interrogate prisoners, decree, determine, decide in a sovereign manner, simply, unerringly, in a few minutes, without missing anything, without losing a useful detail or a second of necessary time. In this intimate and familiar life of the bivouac, flashes of his intellect were seen every moment. You can believe me when I say that he belied the proverb, no man is great in the eyes of his valet. Monsieur the Duke, said I, that proverb is wrong. Every great man is a great man in the eyes of his valet. At this session the Duc d'Aumale, having attained his 25th birthday, took his seat for the first time. The Duc de Nemours and the Prince de Joinville were seated near him in their usual places behind the ministerial bench. They were not among those who laughed the least. The Duc de Nemours, being the youngest member of his committee, fulfilled the functions of secretary as is customary. M. de Montalembert wanted to spare him the trouble. No, said the prince, it is my duty. He took the urn and as secretary went the round of the table to collect the votes. At the close of the session of January 21, 1847, at which the Chamber of Peers discussed Krakow and kept silent concerning the frontier of the Rhine, I descended the grand staircase of the chamber in company with M. de Testejux. Decazes stopped me and asked, well, what have you been doing during the session? I have been writing to Madame d'Orval. I held the letter in my hand. What a fine disdain! Why did you not speak? On account of the old proverb, he whose opinion is not shared by anybody else should think and say nothing. Did your opinion then differ from that of the others? Yes, from that of the whole chamber. What did you want then? The Rhine. Phew, the devil. I should have protested and spoken without finding any echo to my words. I preferred to say nothing. Ah, the Rhine. To have the Rhine. Yes, that is a fine idea. Poetry. Poetry. Poetry that our fathers made with cannon and that we shall make again. With ideas. My dear colleague, went on M. Decazes, we must wait. I too want the Rhine. 30 years ago I said to Louis XVIII, Sire, I should be inconsolable if I thought I should die without seeing France mistress of the left bank of the Rhine. But before we can talk about that, before we can think of it even, we must beget children. Well, I replied, that was 30 years ago. We have begotten the children. April 23, 1847. The Chamber of Peers is discussing a pretty bad bill on substitutions for army service. Today the principal article of the measure was before the House. De Nemours was present. There are 80 lieutenant generals in the chamber. The majority considered the article to be a bad one. Under the eye of the Duc de Nemours, who seemed to be counting them, all rose to vote in favor of it. The magistrates, the members of the Institute, and the ambassadors voted against it. I remarked to President Francaire, who was seated next to me, it is a struggle between civil courage and military poltroonery. The article was adopted. June 22, 1847. The Girardin * affair was before the Chamber of Peers today. Acquittal. The vote was taken by means of balls, white ones for condemnation, black ones for acquittal. There were 199 votes cast, 65 white, 134 black. In placing my black ball in the urn I remarked, in blackening him we whiten him. Émile de Girardin had been prosecuted for publishing an article in a newspaper violently attacking the government. I said to Madame D, "Why do not the minister and Girardin provoke a trial in the assize court?" She replied, "Because Girardin does not feel himself strong enough and the minister does not feel himself pure enough." De Montalivet and Mole and the peers of the chateau voted, queerly enough, for Girardin against the government. Guizot learned the result in the Chamber of Deputies and looked exceedingly wrath. June 28, 1847. On arriving at the chamber I found Francquer greatly scandalized. In his hand was a prospectus for champagne signed by the Count de Meroil and stamped with a peer's mantle and a count's coronet with the de Meroil arms. He had shown it to the Chancellor, who had replied, "I can do nothing." "I could do something though, if a mere councillor were to do a thing like that in my court," said Francquer to me. "I would call the chambers together and have him admonished in a disciplinary manner." 1848. Discussion by the committees of the Chamber of Peers of the address in reply to the speech from the throne. I was a member of the Fourth Committee. Among other changes I demanded. There was, "Our princes, your well-beloved children, are doing in Africa the duties of servants of the state." I proposed, "The princes, your well-beloved children, are doing, etc., their duty as servants of the state." This fooling produced the effect of a fierce opposition. January 14, 1848. The Chamber of Peers prevented Alton-Shee from pronouncing in the Tribune even the name of the convention. There was a terrific knocking upon desks with paper knives and shouts of "Order! Order!" and he was compelled almost by force to descend from the tribune. I was on the point of shouting to them, "You are imitating a session of the convention, but only with wooden knives." I was restrained by the thought that this undershirt uttered during their anger would never be forgiven. For myself I care little, but it might affect the calm truths which I may have to tell them and get them to accept later on.